Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is watching something deeply wrong happen and saying nothing. Not because they agree with it, not because they don't see it, but because silence is easier than courage. And that silence, it's not neutrality, it's not patience, it's not wisdom. Your silence is the loudest vote you will ever cast. Throughout history, every atrocity that ever consumed a civilization didn't begin with monsters. It began with ordinary people who looked away. Silence is compliance. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn survived the Soviet gulags, years of torture, starvation, and psychological destruction, and when he reflected on how it all happened, he didn't blame the tyrants. He blamed the silent. He said, "We didn't love freedom enough." He wasn't talking about the fanatics who built the system. He was talking about the millions who watched it happen and said nothing. Today, we're going to explore the psychology of silence, why your brain chooses it, how societies weaponize it, and why staying quiet in the face of wrong might be the most dangerous thing you ever do. The 25% threshold. Here's a number that should terrify you: 25%. Research from the University of Pennsylvania found that when just 25% of a population firmly commits to a belief, it can flip an entire social norm, regardless of whether that belief is true. 25. That means 3/4 of a society doesn't even need to agree, they just need to stay quiet. Think about what this means. In your workplace, in your community, in your country, a committed minority doesn't need to convince everyone. They only need the rest of you to do what you do best: nothing. A minority that speaks will always overpower a majority that stays silent. This is called the tipping point theory of social change, and it explains everything from fashion trends to political revolutions. The mechanism is brutally simple. When a vocal group pushes hard enough and the majority remains passive, the brain of each silent individual performs a quiet calculation, the cost of speaking up versus the comfort of going along. And almost every time, comfort wins, not because people are evil, but because the human brain is wired to avoid conflict at nearly any cost. And that wiring, it's about to betray you in ways you've never imagined. Conformity trap. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch ran one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of social psychology. He showed a group of people 3 lines of obviously different lengths and asked which one matched a reference line. The answer was painfully obvious, but here's the twist. Everyone in the room except one participant was an actor, and the actors deliberately chose the wrong answer. 75% of real participants conformed at least once, choosing an answer they knew was wrong. 75%, not because they couldn't see, because they didn't want to be the only one who spoke. As Asch himself noted, the tendency to conformity in our society is so strong that reasonably intelligent and well-meaning young people are willing to call white black. Now think about this in your own life. How many times have you sat in a meeting, heard something you knew was wrong, and said nothing? How many times have you laughed at a joke that made you uncomfortable because everyone else was laughing? See no evil. If this pattern is making you uncomfortable right now, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. Because what comes next goes even deeper into why your brain betrays your conscience. That discomfort you're feeling, it has a name: cognitive dissonance. When you stay silent about something you know is wrong, your brain doesn't just move on. It enters a state of psychological warfare with itself. Leon Festinger called it cognitive dissonance, the excruciating tension between what you believe and what you do. Your mind cannot hold 2 contradictions without eventually destroying one. Here's how it works. You see injustice. Your values tell you to speak, but you stay quiet. Now your brain has a problem. You think of yourself as a good person, but a good person wouldn't stay silent. So what does your brain do? It doesn't change your behavior, it changes your belief. Suddenly, it wasn't that bad. Maybe they deserved it. Maybe it's more complicated than it seems. Not my problem. Your brain literally rewrites your moral code to protect you from the guilt of your own inaction. As the philosopher Hannah Arendt observed after watching the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. She called it the banality of evil, and it doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with the small, quiet moment where you choose not to speak. But the damage doesn't stop at the individual level, it spreads. The bystander curse. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment in New York City. 38 people heard her screams. Zero people called the police in time. This case birthed one of the most well-known phenomena in psychology, the bystander effect. Researchers John Darley and Bib Latané discovered something chilling. The the more people who witness an emergency, the less likely any single person is to help. Your sense of personal responsibility dissolves into the crowd. It's called diffusion of responsibility. When everyone is watching, your brain whispers a seductive lie. Someone else will handle it. Someone braver, someone better positioned, someone whose job it is. But everyone is thinking the same thing, and so no one acts. This isn't just about emergencies on the street. It's about every boardroom where harassment goes unreported, every family dinner where bigotry goes unchallenged, every online space where misinformation spreads because correcting it feels exhausting. The bystander effect turns a crowd of witnesses into a crowd of accomplices. As Martin Luther King Jr. wrote from a Birmingham jail, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Your silence doesn't make you neutral, it makes you complicit, and history has shown us exactly where that road leads. Spiral of silence. In 1974, German political scientist Elisabeth Noll-Neumann introduced a theory that explains how entire populations can be silenced. She called it the spiral of silence. The fear of isolation is stronger than the love of truth. Here's the mechanism. You form an opinion, then you look around. If you perceive that your opinion is in the minority, even if it's actually held by the majority, you suppress it. You stay quiet, and because you stay quiet, others who agree with you also perceive themselves as the minority, so they stay quiet too. Fear breeds silence. The spiral tightens. The vocal minority appears larger than it is. The silent majority shrinks into invisibility. This is exactly what happened in the Soviet Union. This is what happened in Nazi Germany. Most people did not agree with the madness, but their silence made it law. Research by Pew Research Center shows this pattern is alive today. 62% of Americans say they hold opinions they're afraid to share publicly. Not because their views are extreme, because the social cost of speaking feels too high. Your ancestors chose silence to survive saber-toothed tigers. Your brain is using that same survival instinct to stop you from raising your hand in a meeting. But what happens when an entire society enters this spiral? Mass psychosis. Mass psychosis doesn't require everyone to believe the delusion. That's the part nobody tells you. It only requires enough people to believe, and the rest to stay silent. Silent. Carl Jung spent decades studying how entire societies can lose their grip on reality. He observed that when individuals fail to confront the darkness within themselves, the shadow, that darkness doesn't disappear. It gets projected outward, onto scapegoats, onto enemies, onto anyone who becomes a convenient target for collective rage. People don't have ideas, ideas have people. When a population is gripped by fear and uncertainty, they become psychologically vulnerable. A totalitarian ideology offers something irresistible: certainty, a clear enemy, a simple narrative, and once that narrative takes hold in the committed 25%, the spiral of silence ensures the rest fall in line. Not through belief, but through the absence of resistance. The gulags, the concentration camps, the cultural revolutions, none of them were built by entire populations of true believers. Built by silence. They were built by a fanatical minority and sustained by a passive majority who were too afraid, too comfortable, or too apathetic to say no. And this is exactly what Solzhenitsyn meant, speaking of which his words deserve a closer look. Solzhenitsyn's wound. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn survived 8 years in the Soviet gulag system. He was arrested for writing a private letter that criticized Joseph Stalin. A private letter. Think about that for a moment. A man was sent to freeze and starve for words he wrote in private. But when Solzhenitsyn reflected on how the gulag system came to exist, how millions were imprisoned, tortured, and murdered, he didn't focus his anger on Stalin. He didn't blame the secret police. He looked at the ordinary citizens who knew what was happening and chose silence. In his masterwork, The Gulag Archipelago, he wrote words that should haunt every person alive today. We didn't love freedom enough. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterward. He was describing a psychological surrender that happened long before the physical one. The moment people decided that their comfort, their safety, their routine was more valuable than truth, that's when the gulags became inevitable. Not when the first prisoner was taken, but when the first neighbor looked away. Comfort over courage. This isn't ancient history. This psychological pattern repeats in every generation, and it's playing out right now in ways most people refuse to see. Digital silence. The spiral of silence didn't disappear with the fall of authoritarian regimes. It migrated, it evolved, and it found a new home: the internet. Social media was supposed to give everyone a voice. Instead, it taught most people when to shut up. Research from the Pew Research Center found that people are less willing to share their genuine opinions on social media than in person. The very platforms designed for expression have become theaters of performed consensus. You scroll through your feed, you see the dominant opinion. You calculate the cost of disagreeing, lost followers, angry replies, social ostracism. And you perform the same ancient calculus your ancestors performed in the town square. You self-censor not because you changed your mind, but because the cost felt too high. Cancel culture, pylon dynamics, algorithmic amplification of outrage. These are modern tools that exploit the same primitive fear Noel Newman identified 50 years ago. The fear of isolation. Algorithm of silence. As Noam Chomsky observed, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion. You don't need to ban speech, you just need to make the cost of speaking unbearable, and the question becomes, what is your silence actually costing you? Cost of quiet. Here's what nobody talks about. Silence doesn't just harm society, it destroys you from the inside. Psychologists call it moral injury, the deep psychological wound that occurs when you act or fail to act in ways that violate your own moral code. Every time you swallow the truth, a piece of your integrity dissolves. Studies on whistleblowers and combat veterans reveal that the trauma of witnessing wrongdoing and staying silent can be more psychologically devastating than the wrongdoing itself. Your brain knows what you should have done, and it will never let you forget. The weight of unspoken truth becomes heavier with every passing day. Think about this in your own life, that time you watched someone get bullied and said nothing. That meeting where an idea was stolen and you stayed quiet. That relationship where boundaries were crossed and you smiled through it. Each instance may seem small, but they accumulate. Psychologist James Pennebaker's research shows that suppressing significant thoughts and feelings increases stress hormones, weakens immune function, and correlates with higher rates of depression. Silence kills slowly. Your body keeps the score of every truth you didn't speak. As Carl Jung warned, that which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. But there is a way out, and it doesn't require becoming a revolutionary. Breaking free. So how do you break the spiral? How do you become the person who speaks when everyone else is silent? The answer isn't dramatic heroism, it's micro-courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is one small act of defiance at a time. Research on moral exemplars, people who stood up during the Holocaust, during apartheid, during every dark chapter of history, reveals something surprising. They weren't fearless. They weren't extraordinary. They simply had a higher threshold for tolerating the dissonance between their values and their silence. 1. Start with private truth. Journal what you actually believe. 2. Practice small dissent. Disagree in low-stakes situations. 3. Find one ally. The spiral breaks when silence is shared. 4. Accept the cost. Speaking has a price, but silence costs more. Václav Havel, who helped overthrow communist Czechoslovakia, described this as living in truth. The power of the powerless lies in the simple decision to live within the truth. You don't need to change the world overnight. You need to change one conversation, one moment, one refusal to look away. Because history shows us that every great moral shift began not with the powerful, but with the honest. Not with armies, but with individuals who decided their integrity was worth more than their comfort. Truth over comfort. The question is no longer whether silence is compliance. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Every civilization that collapsed into darkness followed the same pattern. A committed minority pushed an ideology, and a comfortable majority stayed silent, not because they believed, but because speaking felt too costly. The most dangerous person in any society is the one who sees the truth and says nothing. Solzhenitsyn saw it, Arendt documented it, Jung diagnosed it, and now you understand the psychology behind it. The bystander effect, the spiral of silence, cognitive dissonance, mass psychosis, these aren't just theories in a textbook. They are forces operating in your life right now, in your workplace, in your relationships, in your feed. Speak or surrender. You don't need to shout from rooftops. You don't need to become a martyr. You need to stop betraying your own conscience in the small moments, because those small moments are where civilizations are saved or lost. If you made it this far, comment silence broken if you're ready to choose truth over comfort. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this made you think differently about your own silence, subscribe. Understanding yourself is the work of a lifetime. See you in the next video.